Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. It's no secret. We've talked extensively about this Oregon Ducks program over the last couple of days and weeks, but a lot of our conversations have regarded with what this Oregon team is doing on the recruiting trail. Now, they are certainly making their ways on the recruiting trail, but we got to remind ourselves that this Oregon team heading into 2024 is one of the most dangerous teams in college football, certainly a national championship contender. And doing this exercise of ranking the Oregon position groups heading into 2024, it really does highlight why this team can be so special in the 2024 year. Not only do you have, at least in my mind, multiple position groups that are probably top five in the country, you start getting into the quote unquote bottom tier of these Oregon position groups, they are still really solid. So you're kind of combining, at least in my opinion, some elite star talent, multiple guys that are going to be playing in the NFL in 12 months with a really complete roster. And that's the recipe in this modern era of college football in terms of winning a national championship. Fired up to get into it. Before we do it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the Oregon Duck fans. It's been a blast talking this program over the last couple of days and weeks, and the amount of support you guys continue to show, it truly does mean a lot. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And much more importantly, I would love to hear some feedback from you guys in the comment section. So many different ways you can stack these position groups. I have some hot takes in here from myself as well. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And let's start off with one of those hot takes. I think a lot of Oregon fans would take the wide receiver room as the top position group in the country. Now, hey, I certainly wouldn't necessarily argue with that take. I'm going to go with the offensive line, and it starts for me with what they have at the offensive tackle position. You look at so many premier programs in the country heading into 2024, they have massive question marks at the offensive tackle spot. I look at Oregon at the tackle spots and say, Josh Connerly Jr., Johnny Cornelius, there is a very real chance that both of them go in the first round of the NFL draft in 8 months. You talk about Oregon not having question marks at the tackle spot. These aren't just not question marks. They are premier players at the offensive tackle spot. And you look at it, Johnny Cornelius was so good for Oregon in 2023, making that jump up from Rhode Island. But you look at Josh Connerly Jr., and what excites me the most about him is there were some rocky games in the beginning of the season for Josh Connerly Jr. You go back to the last 6 games that Josh Connerly Jr. played in the 2023 year, he only gave up 3 quarterback hurries, 0 sacks. He played his best football towards the end of 2023, which makes a lot of sense. He was a year 2 football player playing along the line of scrimmage. If Josh Connerly Jr. continues that progression going into year 3, which is normally when you see line of scrimmage players really hit their stride, I think you might be looking at one of, if not the best left tackles that you see in the country. You look on the inside, Marcus Harper coming back for his senior year has been a stalwart on the Oregon offensive line. You're bringing Matthew Bedford from Indiana. I was doing some research this morning. Matthew Bedford has played 2,700 snaps at the Big Ten level over the last couple of years. There's not a more experienced interior offensive lineman than Matthew Bedford. And you look at that center spot, you obviously have to replace a guy like Powers Johnson. I think a lot of Oregon fans are sitting there and saying, Big Poncho, we feel pretty good about what he showed as a true freshman. Probably takes a step going into year 2. I have 0 question marks about the center play for Oregon in 2024. Elite tackles, experience on the inside. I think this offensive line is going to be one of the better units in the country. You go to number 2. Again, certainly could be the best position group on this Oregon team. It's the wide receiver spot. I think it's headlined by Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart. And I think what makes this Oregon wide receiver room, at least for me, so intriguing is that you have NFL caliber guys. You make no mistake about it. Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, Trayshawn Holden, potentially even Gary Bryant, who's not even going to be a starter in the Oregon offense. Those guys certainly could be NFL draft picks in a couple of months. But I think more importantly than just having really darn good football players, it's a super balanced room. You have wide receivers that can excel and do a lot of different things. You look at Tez Johnson. I don't know if there's a better slot wide receiver in the country than Tez Johnson. We obviously know Dylan Gabriel likes to pepper those inside receivers. Then you look at Evan Stewart, a guy that can win vertically, body control. in kind of attacking the deeper third. He's a guy that has to make defenses respect what he can do pushing the ball down the field. You have just a really big catch radius in Trayshawn Holden, who I think is a lot better than a lot of people gave credit for in 2023. Didn't necessarily get a ton of opportunity because you had Tez Johnson and Troy Franklin. You talk about a wide receiver 3 for Oregon. I don't know if you could find a better wide receiver 3 in the country than Trayshawn Holden. Then you sprinkle in some young talent. Kyle Casper looks like he could be a guy. You just don't see many guys that look like Kyle Casper. You obviously have 5-star Jurion Dickey. You throw in Gary Bryant. It's deep. It has top-end talent, but I think most importantly, it has guys that can do a lot of different things. That you look at Will Stein in this offense and say, there are just so many different ways that this Oregon offense can attack opposing defenses because they are diverse at the wide receiver position. We'll throw in the tight ends. Terrence Ferguson would have been an NFL draft pick. Kenny Sadiq, one of the more talented tight ends in the country. Loaded pass catcher room for the Oregon Ducks. Number 3, I'm going to go with the quarterback spot. And I think it starts with the disrespect I feel like Dillon Gabriel gets. When you talk about Dillon Gabriel, does he have the premier NFL arm talent that some other quarterbacks in the country have, even arguably the sophomore Dante Moore? No, probably not. But you talk about Dillon Gabriel as being one of the more productive and prolific quarterbacks we've seen in college football over the last half decade. You go back to what Bo Nix was, why Bo Nix was so special in 2023, it was because of the experience Bo Nix had. Dillon Gabriel brings, if not more experience than what Bo Nix had in the 2023 year. This kid has played so much football. He is top 10 in the history of college football in passing yards. You just don't get to run with a quarterback that has that much experience and production very often. And I think lastly, Dillon Gabriel fits what Will Stein wants to do. I mean, you're not going to ask Dillon Gabriel to push the ball down the field very often in this Oregon offense. You look at Bo Nix' average depth of target last year of only 6.5 yards. This Oregon offense is predicated getting the ball out quickly on time to your playmakers. I think Dillon Gabriel is a very good football player and an offense that fits exactly what he wants to do, surrounded by a ton of talent at the pass catcher room. And then you throw in Dante Moore. If we're kind of grading this position room, I mean, Dante Moore is a special quarterback. You have Austin Novosad, who showed us what he could do in the spring game. It's a really good quarterback room for the Oregon Ducks. Number 4, and again, maybe a little low for my liking as well. Let's talk about the Oregon secondary, and it starts at the cornerback spot. You look at the depth and talent that they have in the cornerback room, starting off with Jabbar Muhammad, one of the best cornerbacks in the country heading into 2024. You're bringing Cam Alexander from UTSA, who was a first-team all-conference caliber guy. You're talking about Jaleel Florence, Dante Manning, both of which have played really good football during their careers, being reserve guys in the cornerback room. You don't see much better cornerback depth across the country. I think the reason I personally have the secondary coming in at number 4 is maybe some question marks at the safety position in terms of depth. That being said, from what I saw from Aaron Flowers in the spring game for Oregon, I feel a lot better about the depth that Oregon has in that safety room heading into 2024. The secondary room coming in at number 4, going to, again, one of the more criminally disrespected units that I think we have for this Oregon program. That's the running back room. I think there's a lot of casual college football fans that will look at Bucky Irving departing from this Oregon, right? So we can see this running back room here. I think a lot of people across the country look at Bucky Irving departing from Oregon and say Oregon's going to take a step back at the running back position. I love Bucky Irving. We banged the table for him all. 2023 was exceptional for Oregon during the 2023 year. Jordan James averaged 7 yards per carry. And Jordan James, in terms of especially running in the Big Ten, I don't know how many more running backs in the Big Ten you're taking over Jordan James. Then you sprinkle in Noah Whittington coming back from injury. Jay Harris, who a lot of, again, casual college football fans are not familiar with. You can't blame him. He's coming from the Division II ranks. The Oregon fans, you guys shout him out on Twitter all the time. Jay Harris is going to be a dude. I mean, he looks like a Power 5 running back, and you're talking about him being, again, a depth running back that's going to get plenty of work. You have 3 running backs that I personally would feel very confident in starting all 3 of them. And then you talk about Jordan James. Again, I think there's some big-time upside to what Jordan James can do, especially giving just a little bit more opportunity in the 2024 year. I'm fired up about this running back room. Not enough people are talking about how good it is, and it makes me sick that they come in at number 5. But what position group are you going to put them over with the 4 that we just talked about? Going to number 6, let's talk about the defensive line, a unit that I give Dan Lanning so much credit in terms of what he did in the offseason. You guys know I was I don't know if critical is the right word, but vocal that the defensive line was one of the position groups I wanted to see Oregon really enhance heading into 2024. That was the position group that I felt like if they got it right, they could be national champions. They did it in the transfer portal, right? You brought in Jamari Caldwell in the winter. You brought in Derek Harmon, who, at least in my mind, was one of the best interior defensive linemen we saw in the portal after spring practice. Then you sprinkle in Amari Washington and Ware Hudson as kind of depth players on the inside. You're running too deep of guys that are really, really good football players with some legitimate game records with Derek Harmon. You look on the edge, you say Jordan Burch, a guy that, again, I still think there's some room for him to grow. I think there's still some meat left on the bone in terms of what Jordan Burch can be as a pass rusher. And then you start talking about Mateo Yu, Blake Purchase, and Tatum Tuioti. You could pick a name out of the hat. One of those 3 players, at least in my opinion, is going to have a breakout year, potentially emerge as the best pass rusher for this Oregon defensive line. I don't know who it's going to be. My personal selection would be Tatum Tuioti, but it could be Mateo Yu. It could be Blake Purchase. Again, all 3 of these players going into year 2. They all played solid football as true freshmen, which is extremely rare. Going into year 2, you're going to see some breakout performances from that group. It's deep with, I think, some big-time upside to that defensive line. Going to our last position group, and again, it's coming in last. It's still a solid position group, and that's the linebacker room. Justin Jacobs, Jeffrey Bassa, 2 guys that – and Jeff Bassa was really, really stinking good for Oregon. I think Justin Jacobs has some room to improve. And I say that meaning I look at Justin Jacobs, I look at the physical traits and the size and the athleticism and say, yeah, Justin Jacobs was solid when he got healthy and was playing for this Oregon defense. He can be an all-conference caliber guy in terms of the physical traits and the talent that he has. If you get that progression from Justin Jacobs, this could be one of the better linebacker rooms you see in the Big Ten as well. And so we're talking about at least in my opinion, the least good position group for Oregon being the linebacker room, where you have Justin Jacobs and Jeffrey Bassa that certainly could be all conference players. That just kind of gives you the feel that this Oregon team, again, not only some really, really high NFL caliber talent with guys on the offensive line and the wide receiver room, but also just a deep team that doesn't have many holes. Heading into 2024, you make no mistake about it. If things fall the right way for Oregon, this, in my mind, is a national championship caliber team. I think we all believe in terms of where Dan Lanning is going with the player development and culture within this program. Loaded team. One of the more exciting teams I think we have in 2024. We'll cut it there. Got to hear from you guys in the comment section. A lot of different ways you could stack these position groups. Would love to hear from y'all. Appreciate you guys rocking with it, and we'll talk to y'all later.